Hi, and welcome to the Balanced Body Podcast series. I'm Cari Reese-Stemler from Paragon Pilates and Physical Therapy in Minneapolis. Today I'm going to be talking about pelvic stability in dancers. What I see a lot with working with dancers is that they go for the picture. They go for the big ranges of motion, and we're kind of trained to make the picture happen without really thinking about the positioning and the stability of the pelvis. So when we're working on the Pilates equipment, we're going to be watching for hip differentiation and for anterior, posterior pelvic tilting, as well as any discrepancies between the right and left sides of the pelvis. You can also work hip differentiation in footwork as a starting point, but for today we're going to go into a little more advanced work and work the leg and the strap work. So Gabrielle is going to take the foot straps and place her feet in the straps so she can push off the frame of the reformer and then just put the straps onto the arches of the feet. So we're going to be working leg work and some ranges of motion in the legs, but what I'm specifically looking at is the torso. So I'm going to have her start in a Pilates V with her heels together. And then, Gabrielle, if you could show some of the pictures of posterior tilt. So a lot of times when they get into position, this is what you'll see. Kind of a bearing down in the abdominals and a posterior tilt in the pelvis. So to start with, you really want to reach the tailbone down so that you have natural curvatures in the spine. And then as per our series on rib popping, you want to watch the ribs pulling in and down. So what I'm watching for is that nice stable pelvis. You're going to reach down a little bit more this way and lengthen through your side body. And then the feet are coming down just slightly so that the ropes are just a little bit over the shoulder blocks. And then she's going to keep the heels touching. Go ahead and bend your knees for frog. So many of you know the frog series, the leg and strap series, but here specifically, we're watching that the pelvis isn't rocking around and that she has that nice length through the spine as she's working. Okay. And now when we go into leg circles, a lot of times when you're working with dancers, they're going to go for the big ranges of motion. So go ahead and show a big range of motion without thinking about your pelvis. So she's going to go through that big range of motion and watch how the back kind of arches, and then when she lifts up you see that posterior tilt in the pelvis. So this is what you're going to see a lot, and again we want to work the neutral pelvis, the ribs drawing in and down, and that transverse working nice and deeply. So when the legs come up, you see the differentiation in the hip socket. And then as the legs open, I'm actually not going to let her go as wide as she wants to go. I'm going to keep her a little more narrow and then drawing the legs together. Good. And again, inhale, the legs come up. Open just the width of the carriage and draw down. So what I want to see is that she's able to control her pelvis in this range of motion prior to allowing the legs to go into the big range of motion. Once I see that her pelvis is stable, I'm going to let her go into the biggest range of motion she can without moving the pelvis. So that's how I know as a teacher if she's gone too far, if I see those compensation strategies. And she's doing a really nice job. So that is her range of motion, and that's where I would work her for this exercise. We also want to train the pelvic stability in a side-lying position. So again, with dancers, we tend to compensate by getting movement from other places. And here we want to really focus on the external rotators of the hip, the pelvic stability, and we're also going to be working glute med strength. One thing that I see oftentimes with dancers is that the gluteus medius is not as strong as it needs to be to actually support the pelvis really well. So before we get into the exercise, Gabrielle's going to take the rope and wrap it around her knee. So to do that, she pushes off the wood frame of the reformer, and then the strap goes through the foot and up into the knee. Okay? Then she's going to come back into that position where one knee is stacked on top of the other. Go ahead and bring your bottom arm here. around. Typically, we would teach this exercise with the hand either down in front of the waistline or up at the shoulder block, but for purposes of today, we're going to keep the arm above the body so that you can see the positioning and the alignment in her body. So I'm watching that the shoulders are stacked, the spine is lengthened and neutral, and then you want to see the ASIS bones stacked one on top of the other. Okay? The bottom waistline is going to be lifting, so that's going to draw the top hip down. So that left oblique is working to help stabilize the pelvis from the top. Okay? So from here, she's going to rotate the right knee, working the external rotators of the hip, and then bringing the knee down. What you'll see oftentimes with unstable pelvis is that the hip will actually rock back quite a lot. And then when they come down, the hip returns. Do that one more time. So you see this opening to get movement from another part of the body. So pausing right there, you're going to reset yourself, lifting up, and then lengthening the sit bone down. We really want to focus on the external rotators. So she's just turning out from the femur and back down, and the pelvis is staying nice and steady. And you'll see that when she does that, her range of motion is much smaller. So even in the dancer, you want to limit the range of motion so that they're working from the right muscle group. Okay? So from here, we're going to lift the foot and the knee at the same time and go into hydrants. So now you're working hip abduction, and the carriage is not going to move. So if you see the carriage moving, there's probably something going on in the pelvis that you'll want to address. So we're just going up and down, and do that one more time. Up and down. Okay, and you're breathing through this, still working your back and side breathing, still working the transverse a lot. So now she's going to go into circles. We're going to do small circles about the size of a baseball, let's say. And the kneecap is just drawing those little circles. So you see that the hips stay nice and solid, and you're working, the head of the femur is stirring in the hip socket. Okay, so you're really working the glute med here. You don't want to see any movement in the pelvis, and you can do circles in both directions, but for purposes of today, we're going to go right into the kickbacks. So go ahead and lift the knee. Take a breath in, and as you breathe out from the back of the leg, she's going to extend her heel. I want to see the heel come right underneath the sit bone. And then as she lifts the knee, you still see that hip differentiation. Exhale, press down. Heel comes down in line with the sit bone. Inhale as the knee comes up. Good. Still monitoring the ribs, the core, and that pelvic stability. Come on in and go ahead and rest. So after working the hip so intensely, you're going to want to take a piriformis and external rotator hip stretch. So you could do figure 4 stretch in this position, or a seated figure 4 stretch, or hip stretch of your choice. But make sure that you do stretch the hips after that intense work. And just to wrap up this series, we have been focusing on pelvic stability for the dancer. Dancers go for those big ranges of motion, especially with the legs, because we're trying to kick our legs high and do big rondejambs. But what suffers is the pelvic stability. So you'll want to watch for hip hiking, tipping the pelvis from side to side, or that posterior anterior tilt. So making sure that the pelvis is stable throughout. And we worked in supine with the legs in the straps, and we worked side lying with the clams and hydrants and circles. Thanks for joining us.